to attend, or if they hear something they want to go back and reference, they'll be able to do that. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's TAMIO webinar. I'm Jay Warren. I'm your TAMIO president, as well as the Director of Communication and Legislative Affairs for the city of Arlington. And we're delighted that so many of you have joined us today for what is a really important topic that I think is often overlooked as we deal with crisis after crisis and deadline after deadline and putting out fires all around us, right? But each of us, as well as all of our teammates as well and our colleagues, we face a wide range of challenges, and we certainly have faced that over the past couple of years. Our jobs were stressful before, and then add COVID and social unrest and the economic downturn, and now I think you could add to it that just the world unrest and everything that's happening in the war in Ukraine. And we just have a high level of stress that can take a toll on any or all of us. And today we're going to talk about how we can support each other and also create a culture of wellness for both ourselves and also for our teams and organizations. It's a really important topic, and we've got an expert here who can really address these things for us. As always, if you have any questions, we'd love for you to include those in either the chat function or the Q&A function. We'll be monitoring both of those, and we'll get to those questions toward the end of our time here this morning. I'm going to hand things over, though, to our moderators who have helped coordinate this entire event. We have Laura Marie Bernard, who is the Public Information Officer for the city of Lake Jackson, and also for my neighboring city here in Dallas, Rhonda Simpson, who is the Public Information Officer for the city of Dallas's Office of Emergency Management. And so Laura Marie and Rhonda, I'll pass off the baton to you all. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. Laura Marie is going to be moderating the chat and the Q&A section because she's got some work going on at her house. So she'll be helping us with the Q&A later. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Nick Metz. Nick is a retired chief of police. He has had 36 years in law enforcement. He's retired. He retired from the Aurora, Colorado Police Department, where he oversaw 1,000 law enforcement personnel in a 400,000 resident town. But he and his wife, Dr. Sarah Metz, have long had a history of working with first responders and PIOs and other types of government workers in psychology, in dealing with stress and dealing with the issues that come up with the traumas that we all deal with in working in government and working with very stressful situations. He's also been part of the Seattle Police Department. He currently has a Bachelor of Science degree in General Studies and is working on his Master of Science in Military and Emergency Responder Psychology program to get licensing for counseling and other support services for responders and frontline medical personnel and families and folks like us. And he has worked directly for over 15 years with PIOs, communicators on all kinds of different levels during natural disasters, civil unrest, mass casualty incidents, controversial police actions. And so we're just really glad to have him here to help us learn more about wellness and leadership and how we can be of service to each other, as well as taking care of ourselves. And this month is going to be that nice overview of kind of the topic, and then come back in April, and Nick is going to help us with some actual good tactics and tools for how to deal with these situations that we have been finding ourselves in for the last 2 years. So Nick, we look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thank you, Rhonda. I appreciate it. Again, I'm Nick Metz, and it's really an honor to be here. And I really want to thank Rhonda for reaching out a few months ago to ask for me to speak. My wife, Sarah, Dr. Sarah Metz, actually presented to you maybe 2 years ago. And through some discussions, it was thought that maybe having a presentation from me might be beneficial for what you all are dealing with right now. I'm going to go ahead and share screen So give me just a moment while I do that, and hopefully it will go the way I want it to go. There we are. All right. So again, I want to thank everybody for being here. As Rhonda was saying, over the last 15 plus years between Seattle Police and Aurora Police, I have worked really closely with our public information officers, and oftentimes was the department spokesperson on very high profile events. I've lost count of the number of press conferences on scene or organized press conferences that I've done. But in working real close with our department PIOs and other PIOs throughout other agencies, I believe I've got a really good appreciation for how hard it is to do what you do. And so when this opportunity came up, I've always kind of felt like the PIOs are really my people. I still keep in touch with a lot of PIOs from throughout the country, because again, that synergy and that organization that we had together and working on a lot of different difficult types of situations, you really gain a huge respect for the work that you do day in and day out. It's not easy work. And as Jay was saying, when you think about, excuse me here, when you think about what you all have been through over the last couple years, basically you all have been through it. And when you think about the role the PIOs have had to play, you in many ways have been either the actual voice to the people in the communities that you serve, or for that matter, obviously preparing and helping to strategize the message to those folks. And your work, in absolute no doubt, your work has not only saved lives, but it has saved property. And so when you look at what has gone on over the last couple of years in various parts of your state and around the country, the role of the PIO has been more important than ever. Like Jay was saying, he kind of stole some of my thunder here. When you think about what's happening, our world changed really in 2020. And we all thought as the pandemic started to slow down, or as the civil unrest started to slow down, things were going to come back to some semblance of normalcy. And unfortunately, we haven't really seen that. So now with the war in Ukraine, the rise in gas prices, the predictions of further inflation, all those kinds of things, the pressures on city government, which then of course transfers to the pressures on the PIOs, has been greater, and is going to become probably even more daunting as time goes on. So it just feels like for a lot of people that 2020 just doesn't end. And so we need to be really mindful of not only how are we taking care of ourselves, but how are we taking care of the people who work for us. When you think about the role that you have, you impact so many people. You look at this chart here and you think of all the different things that are often impacted by the messaging that you put out. The messaging that goes out, whether it's on a local level or all the way to a federal level, obviously can impact the public safety in communities. It can impact business and finance. You know, you look at all these different entities that are looking at what you say, listening to what you say, of course, judging what you say. And I'm going to guess for some of you, you've probably been in situations where you have had to toe the company line for something that maybe you didn't agree with necessarily, a particular message that went out or a particular policy that went out that maybe you weren't necessarily supportive of, but you had to do your job and you had to step up and you had to do that. And maybe by doing that, it impacted how your friends viewed what was said and your involvement, or how your family viewed what you said and your involvement. And when you look at this and you look at the fact that, you know, you and your fellow PIOs are really on the front lines every day, representing your communities, representing your city agencies and county agencies, again, that pressure is daunting. And so we need to really start thinking about the fact that we have to start really thinking about how we build a culture of wellness. And when you think about leadership, leadership is a part of building that culture of wellness. Some of you might be here today and you might be saying to yourself, you know what? I'm not a supervisor. I don't have anybody under me. I wish I did. There's so much work, but I don't really have anybody under me. So really, why am I listening to leadership? Well, the reality is, in your role, you all are leaders in one form or another, whether or not you have someone who reports directly to you or not. You're a leader because of the fact that you are out there every day representing the agency. You are consulting with your government leadership, the elected officials, city and county managers, all those kinds of things, doing your best to make sure that the messaging that goes out to the community is fair, it's equitable, or excuse me, it's credible, it's believable, all those kinds of things that have to go into information sharing to our communities. And we all know that one slip up can really impact the opinion that our communities will have of the organization that we represent. So when you think about this, and as we move forward here, I really want you to think about what your role as a leader is. When you look at this chart here and we think about leadership, leadership is not about, again, not necessarily about leading people. It's not necessarily about having a group of folks from a formal leadership standpoint. For some of you, that may be the case. That may be exactly what you do. But from an informal, it's the ability to influence. And that ability to influence is really where your agencies, your community really depend on you to make those right calls. And we know that oftentimes we only get one chance to get it right. And so how you do that and how you build that environment of trust, how you build that environment of being able to have your voices heard, how you have that environment of impacting the people who work around you every single day is part of leadership. So again, as we move forward, think about it from the standpoint of not just leading people from a formal standpoint, but how you lead people from an informal standpoint. So we created a program this last year called LAWS, and LAWS stands for Leadership, Accountability, Wellness, and Service. And the premise of this concept is that the four particular items there of leadership, accountability, wellness, and service can never be mutually exclusive. When we talk about building a culture of wellness, oftentimes, let me back up. Oftentimes when I ask organization leaders like chiefs and sheriffs and other executives, do you have a culture of wellness within your organization? Oftentimes they'll say things like, well, of course we do. And then I'll ask, well, what are you doing to build that culture of wellness? And they'll say things like, well, we have a peer support team, or we give our employees 1 day off a month for free, or we have EAPs or psych services, those kinds of things. And my response typically to them is, you know what, that's great. Those are things that organizations absolutely need, but those are resources, those are tools. That doesn't necessarily build a culture. A culture of wellness means that people speak about wellness on a daily basis. They ask each other how they're doing. They're not afraid to come forward and say they're struggling. They're not afraid to come forward and tell people around them that, you know what, I'm having some struggles. I'm going to go see the department psych. Taking that stigma out of getting that help. But to have effective wellness with all those resources that we talked about, you have to have good leadership, and good leadership is paramount to that. You have to have leadership that's competent. You have to have leadership that shows that people truly care about the people who they work with. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be formal. And then you have to have a good accountability process. The accountability means having good policies in place, having disciplinary processes that are fair and equitable, having expectations that everybody knows and understands moving forward. Those things all influence an individual's morale, which of course, when we talk about morale, that impacts our wellness. And we're going to go into that a little bit more later. Then we talk about service, having a service-minded philosophy. Typically, when we think of service, we think of the service to the community that we serve. And absolutely, that's the bread and butter of what many of us do. But from this standpoint, what I really want you to think about today as we move forward is not just service to the community, but what kind of service are we providing to the people we work with or the people who work for us? What are we doing day in and day out to make sure that we are creating an environment where they feel comfortable coming to work, they feel safe coming to work, they feel excited to come to work. We've seen over the last 2 years, particularly since the riots of George Floyd in Minneapolis, we've seen impacts around the country with law enforcement where our cops are not wanting to come to work, right? And maybe some of you are working in law enforcement organizations where you are seeing that. But a lot of that really depends on not just at the chief level, but also at the first line level of saying, I'm creating an environment where people feel comfortable coming in. They can come to me with their struggles. If they make mistakes, they can come to me and admit those mistakes, knowing that they're going to be treated in a fair and equitable manner. So all four of those things have to apply when you're talking about building a culture of wellness. It's not just creating resources that employees can take advantage of. So when we teach this class, and I'll have a room full of folks, 40, 50 people, and I'll ask the questions of what is the one most important quality a leader must possess to be successful? And I get tons of different answers. I get answers like they got to be a visionary, they got to be a good manager, they have to be organized, they have to be a good boss, all those kinds of things. And all those qualities are incredibly important when we're talking about leadership. But the one most important quality of leadership is you gotta like people. And that's really simple. And it's funny when I say that, everyone's eyes just kind of open up. It's like, oh yeah, we are in a people business. We don't just serve the people in our communities, we serve the people who work with us. And so being in a people business, obviously we have to like people. And I'm going to guess every single one of you have worked around somebody at one point or another where you looked at them and asked yourself, why are you in this job? You don't like people. Why are you a supervisor? You don't like leading. And then you see how bad the environment is and how miserable people feel coming into work. So the first part of that is really is liking people. So we start to go through that and talk about how that impacts leadership on a day-to-day basis. You're going to see two or three quotes that are really important to me. And these are quotes that I have had on my desk for years when I was both with Seattle and Aurora. This particular quote, I think, really defines what leadership is about. Leadership is about solving problems. The day the soldiers stop bringing their problems to you is the day you have stopped leading them. They either lost confidence that you can help or concluded that you don't care. In either case, it's a failure of leadership. This is where it's important that as leaders, we are constantly engaged with our folks. Yes, as leaders, we get tired of people coming in all the time with complaints or with questions or with all sorts of suggestions of, maybe if you did it this way or you did it that way. And I remember years ago getting really frustrated with that and just feeling like, you know what, let me just shut my door and leave the people on the outside. And we think about that cliche of having that open door policy. But the reality is when we think about that open door policy, usually people think of the fact that people can come into the office anytime. Leadership is about going outside of that office door. Leadership is being out there with the folks and letting them vent, letting them ask the questions, letting them disagree with you, and not pushing them back when there is disagreement. When people are able and feel free to be able to have that kind of dialogue, they feel safe. They feel like they can trust you. They feel like that they are in an environment where they are valued and their opinions are valued. So those kinds of things are really important. We might look at this as kind of an inconvenience of having people come in and complain or ask questions all the time. But when things go silent, that's when you really need to worry. So as we move forward today, there's a few things that I really want you to look at. I want you to be asking yourself a number of different questions. I'm probably not going to be teaching you anything that you don't already know. It's more of a matter of reinforcing some of the things that you know, maybe some good reminders, but really take some time today as we move through some more of these slides of asking yourself, what kind of difference am I making in my environment? With whatever your role is, whether you actually supervise people, whether you are a one-person operation, whatever the situation is for you, but what are you doing to make a difference within your environment, not only for yourself, but for the people who work around you, the people you work, not only who work for you or with you, but even the people who work above you. What are you doing to make that difference? What changes can you make to better the experiences of those around you? And we're going to talk a lot here in a moment of different challenges that we see in organizations, especially today, especially within responder organizations, where there's that challenge of people feeling very apathetic about their job, not feeling appreciated, not feeling valued. And so what can you do to make sure that the people who are around you, whether they work directly with you, whether they work in a completely separate agency, or you work in the police department and you work with the information officers at City Hall, what can you do to better those experiences with them? And then the other part of it is, what legacy do you want to leave? One of the things that we hear a lot right now is people saying, I can't wait to get out of here. Or they make comments like, I got 2 years and 3 months and 4 days and 22 hours to get out of here. They make it sound like they're in prison. They make it sound like they're waiting for their sentence to complete. It's really important to try to turn that message around to where, okay, I've got those 2 years left. What am I going to do in those 2 years to really leave a legacy that I can be proud of? We all know people who have left our organizations with incredible legacies intact, but we also know people who left with a legacy that we could not wait for them to leave and hopefully never come back. What is it you want to leave? And those are questions only you can answer. And so those are things today that I really want you to be thinking about as we move forward. This is the other quote that I absolutely love. And again, I've used this quote for 20 plus years. People may not remember what you said or what you did, but they're always going to remember how you made them feel. And to me, when we think about the work that we do in the community, this quote epitomizes that philosophy. We want our communities to make sure that the things that we do, the messaging that we provide, even if it's messaging that they don't want to hear, they feel that the messaging is credible, that it's sincere, that it's genuine. That's what they want. But then we also think about it from the leadership standpoint. I believe this quote epitomizes that as well, because every day we interact with people. Sometimes we interact with people who are really easy to get along with. And I'm sure you guys have folks that you work with where every day it feels like a challenge. But how we interact, how we communicate, the things that we do, again, they may not remember everything that you may have said or did, and maybe you're not even realizing it. But if we're not intentional in thinking about how we deliver news to our coworkers, how we establish new policies, how we talk about office issues and politics, all those kinds of things, they will remember that feeling. They will remember whether or not, again, you were genuine and sincere in how you approach that. And so again, keeping those things in mind before we pull the trigger on different types of things can be really important. So for those, when you think about the last 2 years, especially, we've seen a lot of trauma. We have seen a lot of trauma that has impacted our responders, that have impacted our responders' families, that have impacted PIOs, all those types of things. And oftentimes when we think of trauma, we think about those traumas of the situations like floods and shootings or things like that. And it's not to say that those traumas don't impact who we are and what we do each day. But for the most part, we're pretty resilient people, and we are able to kind of work through a lot of those traumas with the assistance of our families and our friends, and for that matter, maybe taking advantage of psychological services. But where the real trauma comes into play is when we talk about organizational stress. Now, I know a little bit about organizational stress because I've created my share of it over the last 20 plus years as a law enforcement leader. And every one of you, I'm guessing, on this webinar has created organizational stress in some form or another. Will we ever get rid of organizational stress? Absolutely not. We have to establish policies. We might have to say, okay, there's an extra 2 or 3 pages of paperwork that you have to do for the certain incident, all those kinds of things that contribute to this. But it kind of goes back to that quote from Maya Angelou of thinking ahead of time of when we have to impose certain things, when we have to create new policies, are we taking steps to minimize the negative impact on our people? Meaning, are we communicating with them upfront before we actually introduce a new policy? Are we getting their input? All those kinds of things make a huge difference in how people will accept the kinds of stressors that we all have to go through. Again, you're not going to ever get rid of it, but it's one of those things where it's really important to keep in mind. When I've taught this class to law enforcement folks, one of the questions I ask of these, and these are cops, and I'll say, what is it you fear most in your job? And the things I hear are things like, I don't want to get an internal affairs complaint. I'm afraid of getting disciplined. I'm afraid of getting fired. I'm afraid of becoming a YouTube sensation. I'm afraid of getting sued. I'm afraid of getting prosecuted. What I never heard in all the times that I've done this class, not once has anybody said, I'm afraid of getting hurt or I'm afraid of getting killed. Let that soak in for a moment. When you think about the fact that our cops out there, other responders out there, probably even folks in your office are thinking things like the organizational stress that goes on and not necessarily worrying about your own physical well-being. That says a lot about the kinds of stressors that we have in our society right now and how that's impacting our organizations and how it's impacting the day-to-day life of the people who work for us. So part of in thinking about that and in thinking about how do we strive to reduce that, oftentimes what ends up happening is people will say, well, you know, I don't have any influence. You know, that's the morale, all these kinds of things. That's the chief's issue. That's the director's issue. That's the sheriff's issue. They're the ones that are responsible for fixing the morale, all these kinds of things. And to some degree, you're right, if that's what you're saying. But one of the things that we're not really thinking about, and we see this a lot in the conversations that we have in these classes, that people aren't realizing that no matter what area you're responsible in, no matter how many people you may have responsible to you, or maybe you don't have anyone responsible to you, you can control, there's areas that you can control. And we can't wait for our agencies, for example, to build that culture of wellness. I've had people say to me, you know, hey, chief, this is great. You're telling us to build a culture of wellness, but you should be having this conversation with our chief and sheriff. And they are right, we should be. But if you wait for that person on the top to say, okay, our department's going to have a culture of wellness, you might be waiting a long time. You can build a culture of wellness within the areas that you are responsible for. And those things can be just small things, being intentional about getting to know the people who you work with, having conversations about wellness, encouraging people to seek wellness assistance. All those kinds of things can really play an important factor in how we move forward in building that culture of wellness. And what's really interesting about this is oftentimes people begin to realize that they have a lot more influence than they may think they have. And I'll sit down with folks, and again, they'll point to the top, or they'll point to their immediate boss and say, well, I can't do this because they don't do this and they don't do that. Okay, there may be certain restrictions, but again, there are areas in which you can take certain control and be responsible for your piece of the pie. It's not always going to be easy, and it may not always feel fair, but taking advantage of those opportunities to create that healthy environment is important. I have walked into organizations where the whole organization is in chaos, and you can find one unit of employees where they're still having fun. They're still out there doing the job that they need to do. And that's because their supervisor, their leaders, informal leaders as well, have said, we're not going to let all this other noise around us influence how we work day to day. We're going to continue to do our mission. We're going to work together and we're going to have fun. And I love the F word, fun. The other part is to really start thinking about, why are you a leader? And again, you can't just look at it from the standpoint of whether or not you supervise somebody. You're a leader in what you do every single day. So why did you go into the profession that you went into? Why did you decide to be that leader and put yourself out there? Those are questions that only you can answer. But some of those reasons may include things like, you felt that there was a real desire on your part to improve the organization that you were working with. Maybe you felt a true desire to be a leader because you wanted to be there for your people. You wanted to make their lives better. You wanted to make their experiences better. Maybe you wanted to be a leader because you wanted the power and the prestige, the advancement of that. Maybe you wanted to be a leader because the money was good. No judgment on any of those reasons. And certainly those are, again, as I said before, those reasons are your own, and those are things that you have to really think about. But here's the thing I really want you to consider. You may know in your head why you chose to be a leader, and you may think that you're the only one who knows that. But I will guarantee you, the people who work around you, the people who work with you, know exactly why. They know whether or not you're in it for the people. They know whether you're in it for the advancement. They know whether you're in it for the money. It's not a secret. They can tell. So keeping that in mind and understanding how you are communicating that type of persona is incredibly important. One of the things that we have to remember when we're thinking about leadership is the fact that we set the tone. We set the tone every single day with what we do, how we walk into the office each day, how we greet people, how we handle problems, how we handle the challenges, how we handle mistakes. All those things set the tone. I want to share with you just a little story. When I was with the Aurora Police Department, I went out to one of the districts, and this district is like in the suburb of Aurora. I mean, this is where, it's a great place to work. And you get a lot of people that go out there because it's just a nice area. It's a beautiful building, nice community, all those kinds of things. And I went to a roll call. I went to the 3 p.m. roll call. I walk in, the sergeant is there, and he's the only one in the room at the time. And I walk in and I'm like, "Hey, Sarge, how you doing?" And he looks up at me, and he puts his reading glasses down on his nose, and he just looks at me and he says, "Well, I'll tell you, this district sucks. Our commander sucks. Our new uniforms suck. The Tahoes you got us suck. And by the way, you suck." And I'm like, okay, I'm really glad I came here today. And so we talked a little bit, and he just really angry. And so then his troops start coming in, and they all walk in looking angry, looking like they'd rather be anywhere than work. And they sit down, and I get up and I say, "Hey guys, I'm here, just want to hear how things are going." And basically I get the fact that the district sucks, their commander sucks, the uniform suck, the cars suck, and by the way, I suck. And so I remember walking out of there, and I just felt like, what just happened? I've never had a roll call like that. And I remember being incredibly angry and thinking, I don't even know why I bothered coming out here. Well, there's a 3:30 roll call that comes on. So basically comes on about 10 minutes after the other one ends. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what, I'm not even going to go. Not going to go. I'm so mad. And then I remembered, well, no, people know I'm here. And if I don't show up, they're going to think I punked out. So I went in. The sergeant's in there by himself, different sergeant. I walk in, he gets up, he's like, "Chief, hey, how you doing?" High fives me, gives me a hug. And I said, "How are things going?" Wasn't expecting this, right? Think about what just happened the last roll call. And he says, "Oh man, we love our district. We love our commander. Thank you for the new Tahoes. Thank you for the new uniforms. And thank you for everything you're doing." I'm like, what just happened here? He's got a boom box in the roll call. And I said, "What's the boom box for?" And he says, "Oh, every day we start our shift off with a song. Each officer gets to pick a song that we start our day with. And then it's a different song every day. Sometimes it's country, sometimes it's hip hop, sometimes it's maybe polka, I don't know. And it gets people talking and laughing and giving each other mess about the songs that they pick and so forth. And the troops walk in, And I ask the same question, how are you guys doing? And it's the same thing. We love our district, we love our commander, we love our new uniforms, we love our cars, and thank you for what you're doing. The common denominator for both of those roll calls was the sergeants. The sergeant set the tone. And sometimes as leaders, we don't appreciate how much our persona is contagious to the people we work around. If we're strong leaders, whether we're informal or formal, we can really influence the people that are around us, negatively or positively. And so this is where we have to think about, well, what is it we want to do? This goes back to the legacy. What kind of legacy do we want to leave? Do we want our people coming into work each day miserable because we're miserable? Or do we want them coming in looking forward to the mission and that they believe in the mission because we as leaders believe in the mission? The other part of that is then to accomplish like this kind of thing is we have to be curious about each other, the people who work around us. When you think about it, when you start dating somebody, there's the one thing that we do a lot of, and we're going to keep this G-rated, but the one thing that we do a lot of is we ask questions. We ask questions about each other because we want to know everything there is. And then when we're with them for several years, we don't ask as many questions because we figure, well, we know everything there is to know about them, when in reality, we really don't. So taking that time to get to know the people who we work with and asking them about their kids, asking them about, their goals, all these kinds of things makes a difference. And you want to start slow. It's not something you want to just start going in there and asking all these personal questions, but it lets people know that you really care. And especially when you come back and you can reflect on the fact that you heard what they said last week. Hey, how did your daughter do at the soccer tournament? How did your son do it at the theater? All these kinds of things to let them know that you heard them and you remember them. And then it's going to be really important for them to see who you are. Let them see your vulnerabilities. You're going to have people who work around you or for you who are going to be struggling with all sorts of different things. It could be relationship issues, family issues, it could be illnesses, it could be substance issues. All those kinds of things can come up. And if you've experienced those kinds of things, and when you're able to share with folks that you've had those kinds of experiences, it makes it that much easier for them to come to you later down the road when they really have an issue, because they're going to feel like you're not going to judge them because you've been through it as well. This is how we start to reduce the stigma of asking for help. This is how we really start to build that culture of wellness, when people feel like they can tell each other stories, they can share the mistakes that they've made, and knowing that the people who work around them are going to still support them. You might think about that movie from quite a few years ago called What a Woman Wants, where Mel Gibson, which is a scary example using Mel Gibson for this, but Mel Gibson, if you remember, somehow wakes up one morning and he's able to read the minds of women, which is a really scary thought. But you might remember there was a character in that movie who never felt like she was seen. She just kind of walked around, nobody ever talked to her. She just kind of was this invisible person. And it wasn't until he actually read her mind as she passed by and she talked about wanting to kill herself. That's a little dramatic, but I know of several situations in my career where because employees felt safe in going to either their supervisor or a coworker, that they were really struggling because that coworker saw who they were and saw them for them. And those are the kind of things that are important. And you just never know. You really might save a life. The other part of this is letting people know that you take responsibility. It's so rare that we hear leaders, no matter what rank they are, admitting mistakes, admitting fault, letting people know that, you know what, I could have done better. I missed the mark. I could have handled that situation a lot better. And this is where, again, that's that vulnerability piece. That's letting people know that you recognize your own weaknesses. You recognize your faults. We all make mistakes. And my guess is every one of you here have worked for somebody who never took responsibility for the mistakes that they made. It was everybody else's fault. If that hadn't happened, I would never have made that mistake. Okay, well, I guess you can argue with them about that, but the reality is When you are vulnerable to others and you can admit your mistakes, it again lets people know that you are human. It lets people know that they can come to you and let you know of their mistakes, because they are going to make mistakes. And then they also get to see how you will handle mistakes. Are they good faith mistakes that they can learn from and move forward, or are they mistakes of the heart, which, okay, you're gonna have to live or die on this one. Either way, if they feel like they can come to you because they know that you are someone who takes responsibility for yourself, it makes a huge difference. And then there's being empathetic. And I love Brene Brown. If those of you out there have not ever heard of her or have not really followed her, she's got some great videos out there, but I love this quote. In order to empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine their experience to be. And I'm going to guess each one of you at some point or another has had someone tell you, you know what, that's not how you should have looked at it. That's not how you should feel. That's not how you should respond. They're not seeing things through your lens. And so it's important as we're working with people that we are really thinking about their experience and listen to that and respond to that and understand. They could be completely wrong. It's not saying that you just let them have a pass, but understand that it is very possible that what they saw is real to them. The other part is acknowledging people for who they are and for what they do. We all want to be seen. We all want that acknowledgement that we did a good job. And sometimes you hear leaders say, "Oh gosh, I don't know, I got to write another commendation. I don't know why we have to do that. Just do your damn job." Well, think about how important that is. Think about the fact that you're driving down the busiest street in your community, and you're driving down the street, traffic is wall to wall, and there's somebody trying to get into traffic from a parking lot, and everybody's passing and not letting them in. And then you decide to be the good Samaritan and stop, and you wave them in, and now they go. And you're like, I did a good job. I did a good thing. Where's my wave? They didn't wave. They didn't do anything. They just like, screw you. I got what I wanted. I know for me, and I'm going to guess for some of you, it's like, what the heck? I just stopped. I did a favor for you, and you can't even give me the common decency to wave. And so now you get this feeling of just being homicidal, right? And so when you think about just that somebody who we don't even know, that we did a favor for, does not acknowledge the fact that we did something good for them, it makes us mad. So think about the people who we work around. So letting people know they're doing a good job, letting them know you see them is really important. The next part is just to really think about what kind of leader do you want to be and how do you want to be seen by others? When you look at this graph here, obviously there's different things. How do you want your family to see you? How do you want what kind of leader do you want to aspire? How do you want your troops to see you? The people that work for you? How do you want your bosses to see you? And I'm going to guess that we know people who are seen in two different ways, from how do I want my family and friends and employees to see me versus how I want my bosses to see me. To me, the two should actually be pretty much the same. So again, it's really just kind of helping to do that self-measurement of where we are as leaders. We talked a lot about this already, but I'm just that reminder that credible leadership creates a culture of wellness. And I'm going to go into some areas here that we're going to probably go into again next month, and you might see these same videos, but it's important, I feel, to go through these because a month is a long time away in some ways, and I want to make sure that I kind of give you some things to think about because you just never know what can happen. One of the things that I think we as organizations don't do well enough is really taking care of and connecting with the families of our employees. We hear all the time things like, the Seattle police family or the Dallas police family or the Dallas Fire Department family, all those kind of things. We say the word family, but oftentimes when we say it, it doesn't necessarily include the families of our employees. And so it's really important to, when you look at this slide here, to think about where our employees are or where our families are and how we're taking care of them. Because how things are at home and how well the family feels connected to our organizations is really going to reflect on that relationship and how well that person, how well that person performs at work, how they come into work, all those kinds of things. I've had the sad, unfortunate privilege, if you will, to have to respond to the hospital, both here in Colorado and in Washington, 30 plus times for line of duty deaths of officers and firefighters. Almost every single time as the family comes walking in during that crisis, and there's 70, 80 cops or firefighters in the ER, and they walk through that gauntlet, and their lives have been completely turned upside down. They don't know, they realize at that point, they don't know anybody. And you have someone telling them, hey, we're here for you, whatever you need, and they don't know anyone, including their officer's first line supervisor. So getting to know the families, making strategies of getting to know them can be really helpful. I'm going to speed up here because we're running out of time here. Social media. I know that all of you are really connected to social media. You deal with it every single day. And you probably find yourself at times going, God, I got to get off my phone. I got to get off my computer. I got to be able to just, get away from everything. We are seeing a lot right now in our practice where social media is significantly impacting personal relationships, work relationships, and performance. We all know of people who have done some dumb things on social media that have put themselves in work jeopardy. And one of the biggest problems with social media, particularly things like Facebook, is that we judge our own lives compared to the people that are who else is on there, right? We look at and we see all these people on there who have the bright shining faces and just their lives are just great. And we look at our own lives and go, why am I not as happy? Why is my life, in the dump? When for me, I know that a lot of those folks who post those kinds of pictures of being all happy, their lives are in the dump. But they're doing that because they're trying to keep up with the Joneses. And so we have to really be careful on social media with ourselves, with our families, and just really making sure that we're monitoring that. And what's really interesting right now is that the American Psychological Association is actually pushing for social media addiction to be part of the diagnostic statistical manual. I'm not going to say that again, otherwise known as the DSM. So probably within the next year or so, you're going to see that as an actual recognized addiction that's really impacting our social mores and our social health. The other thing that we deal with every single day in our organizations are rumors. And as a leader, we have to really control rumors. We have to quash them. We have to not participate. Everyone in this chat, I'm going to guess at one point or another, including myself, has spread a rumor. We've just done it. That's just our favorite pastime. But every single one of us have also been the subject of a rumor, I'm going to guess. And so thinking about it from that standpoint and understanding how it can really tear down the fiber of our this wellness culture is really important. And I always love how, like with PIOs, some PIOs that I worked with, that they get bent out of shape when the news gets it wrong, when the news puts out misinformation about an incident. They're just their minds are blowing up. And then they get it resolved, and then the next thing they're doing, they're spreading a rumor about a coworker. It happens. And so recognizing that kind of contradiction is really important. The other part that we need to be thinking about is what we're bringing into our environment. We all come in with baggage. We all come in with baggage from our childhood, things that we may have dealt with in our early adulthood, other traumas that we may have had, and things how that impacts us, but then how we take that out on others. And this is where it's really important for that culture of wellness to really talk about getting therapy and resolving a lot of those issues. We tell our officers, if you've got stuff that you're still dealing with from your childhood, you need to get this resolved now, because you're going to deal with traumas in the job that are just going to compound these things even more and make it more difficult for you. So we always are always trying to encourage people to get that stuff out, get it out of the head, because it's like a balloon. If you don't take care of it, at some point it's going to pop. And there's really only so much that we can hold in our brain. And we're going to go into more details about this next month, but I wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about that. We talk about external signs of significant stress. This isn't just for you. I want you to look at this and see the different things that are here and think about if you are experiencing some of these things, but also how do you recognize this in others? This can be really this can be really apparent during normal times. It can be apparent during deployments, any of those kind of things. But understanding these stressors can be important. Stress isn't necessarily always bad. We equate the word with bad. Stress can be good when we equate it with wanting some, or equate it to something we care about. So for example, before I came on today, I was stressed, but I was excited about being here with you today and giving you this information. But anything in the extreme can also be dangerous, right? So understanding these risks, understanding that, and looking for those in folks. When you start asking people those questions and being curious, all those kinds of things, you start to learn people's baseline. And understanding that when they start to go below that baseline for a protracted period of time, we have to be able to address it. We're not going to be able to solve everybody's problems. We're just not going to be able to do that. And sometimes all we can do as leaders is just sit in the suck with them, letting them know that we're there for them. We can't solve whatever problems they're going through. They may have just lost a family member. You can't fix it. But when they know that you're there, when they know that you're checking on them, whether it's the occasional text, taking them to lunch, the phone calls, just sitting with them quietly as they process and as they grieve, all that means so much. And if you go back to the Maya Angelou quote, you may have not done much. You may not have felt like you did a lot to change or help them, but it's something they're always going to remember, that you were there for them during the worst times. We all work in a profession where we tend to really look for the negative. We deal with the negative every day. If we're in policing, emergency management, fire, any kind of government work, where a lot of the things that we deal with, especially from your perspective as information officers, is that you deal with a lot of the negative that comes in. That's part of the job, but it's also important that we really take the time to look for the positives, to really look at the things in our lives that are going well, taking the time to stop and smell the roses, pet the puppy, embracing our faith and our spiritualness. Those kinds of things is what gives us that strength and builds us up to move forward. And finally, not finally yet. So this is a really good friend of mine, Crystal McCoy. She was one of my PIOs, and sometimes just these amazing quotes would come out of her mouth. And one day she was really upset about a fellow PIO from another agency, and she just threw this out there. And I remember I was like, stop, I'm gonna write this down. But she's now a PIO for the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms in Denver. But this, again, leadership is not about controlling others. It's about really doing what we can to influence the lives of others and making those experiences as healthy as possible. And finally, I want to leave you with this. So if you're not familiar with Simon Sinek, I would really encourage you to get familiar with him. He's got a lot of videos on YouTube. I will admit I have a man crush on him. I think he is one of the finest leadership gurus, but be the leader you wish you had. We all know of leaders that we've worked with that were just amazing and really built us up. But then we also had leaders that unfortunately didn't really provide the kind of motivation that we really needed. So as we're thinking about that as leaders, no matter what position you hold, be that leader that you wish you had. Be that leader that moving forward that is going to influence and positively influence the lives of others. So with that, I just want to say thank you. I apologize. I think I went a little bit over, but I am really happy to have had this opportunity, and certainly look forward to spending time with you next month as we go into more of the wellness aspects of leadership with those strategies that Rhonda had talked about earlier.
So thank you very much, Nick. We've seen some comments that people are just loving the topic. So thank you so much for coming. We haven't seen any questions come up in the chat yet. So if you do have any questions, please either put them in the chat or the Q&A. The only question we had come up is if they could share the recording with colleagues. So
absolutely.
Okay, we'll work with Lauren on that. And I have to admit that one of the things that jumped out at me was there at the end about sitting in the suck, and not realizing that that's kind of what we've been doing for a while with the, especially in emergency management with the compounded emergencies. So it's like, nobody wants to sit in the suck, but you know, sometimes that's where you are. So it's weird what jumps out at you. I actually had to write that down.
Exactly.
So
It's what we do.
it is. So are there any, does anybody have any questions for Nick now, or are we just or are folks just kind of saving them up for next month when we get tools?
Rhonda,
Yes, ma'am.
the recording will be posted on the TAMIO website later today or by tomorrow for anyone who asked about that. And I will just make a few comments as we're waiting for the questions to come in. One of the things you said, Nick, was you talk about leadership for others, but what can the leader do to protect themselves so they can be ready to lead?
That's a really good question. First of all, I would tell you, educate yourself as much as you can on leadership. I'm not big on the textbooks type of thing. You know, I like the leadership philosophies of people like Simon Sinek and Brene Brown, and people like Sir Richard Branson from Virgin Airlines, people like that Branson, excuse me, who really understand that when you really think about what we do, the most important asset are the people that we work with, the people that come into work each day. How they feel each day coming in, the commitment they have to what they do each day is going to be translated into that service to our community. So it really comes down to really thinking about your strategy and building that strategy for your leadership. Also understanding that leadership, you're going to go through phases, right? You're going to find some areas where, gosh, this works really well, this doesn't work so well, and you're going to have to fine tune it. But also don't be scared to get that feedback from people. Get that 360-degree eval from your folks and ask them how you're doing, but be prepared for them, but give them the permission to give you the tough feedback, because that tough feedback is only going to make you better.
Right, right. I'd also say that there are things that we can do to also support our leaders. Even as you were going through your presentation, I was texting my boss and saying, I just want you to know that I recognize some of the things he's talking about in you. And don't let anyone get you down because they don't see what other leaders see in you. Can you talk a little bit about that leaders recognize leaders?
Absolutely. We always talk about the fact that we have to take care of our leaders. I know that when I've gone through some tough times in the media or things like that, and getting texts from officers saying, you know, thank you for having our back. Thank you for putting yourself out there and buffering what we have to go through. You know, because sometimes leaders, you know, when you talk about leadership and you say it's lonely at the top, it is. But when people recognize what you're doing and they tell you and they see it, it means the world. So I love the fact that you took that time to tell your leader, I see what you go through and I appreciate what you do.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in one funny for you, and then I'll give it back to Rhonda. You mentioned what a woman wants in your presentation. I happen to know the screenwriter of that film.
What was that? I'm sorry.
I know the screenwriter.
Oh, you do? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I know her really well. She's a friend of mine. So I also just DM'd her and said, you will not believe that your film is being used in a leadership and cultural wellness as a case study. So if she bounces back while we're still on, I'll let you know what she said about that. So,
well, and admittedly, I came up with that about 20 minutes ago, or 20 minutes before we went on the thing on the, I was like, hey, that's right.
Yeah, well, that's great. She's gonna love that too. But Rhonda's right. There's just lots of positive statements, and they love it, and they were really glad to have it. So Rhonda, thank you for getting Nick and putting this together. So it's all yours.
I'm just glad Nick was here. We did have a question in the Q&A that said this was a great session. The video will only be on the TAMIO site that is promoting this webinar, and there will be a notice that goes out to the Facebook group. So that's the answer to that. And Nick, we totally look forward to seeing you next month with the tips and the tricks and the things. Do you have anything else you want to close out with before we throw it back to Jay?
I will just say, number one, again, thank you. But also, if anything comes up within the next few weeks before we meet where people feel like they want a particular area focused on, let me know, and then we can certainly have that discussion.
We will absolutely do that. So if you guys want to send that to either Lauren or Dorothy, probably Dorothy White, the education chair, she'll get those to us and we'll get those to Nick. Okay. Oh, Jay isn't on anymore. I think there were some announcements at the end. Lauren, do you have those?
I don't, but I think that mostly we just remind everybody to look for the notices for the second part of this in April, this webinar.
Okay.
I don't have the date off the top of my head. Do you, Rhonda?
April 20th.
Okay. And also, y'all, please make a note of the annual conference. Hopefully we will get information up on the website early next month in April and open up registration. And I think that's most of our announcements.
Okay. I just pulled up Dorothy's notes. She wants a special note of thanks to the Education Development Committee. This group is doing a great job putting together these webinars and content, and yeah, we'll continue this in April. And thank you to everyone for the great TAMIO Award entries. The deadline has just passed and they will announce the finalists soon, and the winners will be announced at the annual conference in June. So check out the website for more information on that. So with that, everybody, watch for the link for this if you need to redo some stuff. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Lauren. And thanks to everybody for being here today.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Be safe.